Welcome to Village Church Sermon Q&A. Pastor Michael here with you, here with Pastor Alex and Pastor Craig. And on August 15th, 2021, we preached a sermon on fundraising and the tabernacle and offering and giving and tithes, and it was fun and controversial and all that good stuff. So the question that we get to answer together is, should pastors and churches tithe? I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and say, no.
Right. It's really convenient that I get to answer this question for myself, right?
But in all seriousness, let's start with pastors and then we'll move to churches. So Alex, we'll start with you on the pastor side. Should a pastor tithe, not tithe? Because technically what I am tithing is already a tithe given to me. It's like,
yeah, so it's like
double time.
Reciprocating.
Yes. It's what's the movie where they spin the thing? Inception. It's tithe Inception.
Yeah, right. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, I think pastors should tithe. You know, with what is reasonable, everybody has to make generosity for pastors. Pastors are people, right? So generosity does not escape us, right?
Yeah.
So we still have to think about that. And so yeah, that's the gist of what I got.
Yeah, I mean, treat people like people. Yeah, basically.
Right.
Like I need to be generous. My heart needs to grow.
Right. Well,
you know?
right. Like if I want my heart to follow after the things of God, like I should put my money in a place where my heart can follow it. Right.
All right. So Craig, let's poke here, right? Let's say a church doesn't pay their pastor well. Like there are pastors who somehow have to live in this area, and we'll like timestamp. Look, 2021, Chicago's not a cheap place to live, and they're making $30,000 a year or $35,000 a year, and it's like, how do you raise a family on that? And so, what do you like? What do you say to somebody who is just like, I literally barely make any money. I'm trying to make ends meet. We're technically under the poverty level. And then do we look at them and say, well, now you got to give? Is sometimes a lower salary like a justification for? I mean, I'm just processing out loud because that's what a lot of pastors who may watch this might think.
Yes. And I feel for those pastors because I've walked in those shoes. Yeah. Our first church paid us $15,000 a year. And it was an unlivable wage, even way back when the dinosaurs.
I was going to say, that was like 60 years ago, wasn't it? So.
It's like $1 million today.
Actually, I think when we came on, it was 12.5, but they gave us a parsonage, and so, but there's no equity you build into a parsonage, and so they're patting themselves on the back, going, we're paying this guy. But in actuality, it was all we could do to just keep our necks above water. Yeah. And so, I think churches need to understand that they do need, in order for the pastor to be all he can be, they really do need to take that burden off of him. This is also a very biblical concept in the New Testament. Paul talks about this actually in a few different places. Don't muzzle the ox while he's treading out the grain. Yeah.
And the burden you're talking about is paying them a wage they can live on.
Just something they can live on. Not anything extraordinary, because I think pastors I've seen this susceptible to fall into really nasty situations when they're paid too much. This one pastor I knew that took the passage where Paul says the elder's worth of one specialist preaching is worthy of double honor.
I like that passage.
And he looked at the people in the congregation, and he judged how much they were making. He found the one that made the most, and then he said, "Well, my wage." He went to the elders and he said, "My wage should be double,
2 times that,
whatever that person is making." Yeah,
you're fired.
Well, he actually didn't last long in the church. There's all kinds of stories like this, and so I think pastors are people. And I think money takes their eyes off of the ball, just like it does for a lot of other people. Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to get through the eye of a needle than it is for him to get in the kingdom of heaven. And I think because we get our eye off the ball when we get our eyes on the money. It's also interesting that one of the telltale signs that your church is dying is if you talk about money all the time. It's a telltale sign. So I think for pastors, I totally agree. Pastors should be, I don't know if tithing, pastors should be giving.
Yeah, right. Should be giving, right.
Should be giving because it, like we do communion, like pastors are baptized, pastors do communion, pastors tithe. We are people like everybody else. And so we need to direct our heart to love what God is loving by being financially invested in what God is doing.
That's good.
Yeah, I can imagine a world where an elder board would say, "Listen, we're not paying you a lot of money, so we're asking you not to tithe. This is all whatever. This is all going to kind of
hopefully that elder board would take the responsibility to say something like that.
Right, and that would be the hope. So, like, I do want to defer to that community, But as a default, I completely agree. Now let's talk about churches. Should churches tithe? We know churches do tithe. Some churches give a certain percentage to missions or church plan. I think yours does, right?
So
Your
we're a Christian and Missionary Alliance
Yeah.
church. We give 7.5% to our district. But here's the reality. Our district is a massive resourcer of our church. They provide tons of resources, give us leadership training, so they really take care of us on that end. So anyway, that's we have kind of a set amount that we're required to give. And even then, there's a little bit of ability to, if you're struggling to not pay that.
We had one of the churches that I was at, I appreciated this heart that they had. They were trying to increase their ability to support missions around the world. And it was not very well, it's like 4 or 5%. And so they made a goal. They said, we're going to give 20% of our giving to mission work around the world. And within 2 years, they achieved that goal. So I think again, you're learning to love. And the way you learn to love what God is doing is you fund what God is doing.
Yeah,
and
because churches as a whole,
purpose.
if you're not finding something outside of yourself to orient your money towards, then that system itself can become just like a person can if they hold on to their money.
You just keep feeding yourself and feeding yourself and feeding yourself.
And when you tell the folks, we're trying to get up to 20% for this purpose. They dive into that. They buy into the vision.
We want to be
because
connected to God's work around the world, right? Yeah.
I think every church has, we talk about this all the time. I don't know that people in churches always realize this. Every church, yes, we have the same big mission, but your context and your people and your pastors and your heritage, all of that give you kind of this specific focus. Usually there's one or two things that a church does really, really, really well. And for some people, it's local outreach. For some people, it's evangelism. For some people, it's missions. And there's just different. For some people, you think of like these big teaching ministries. It's really the pulpit, and they're bringing the teaching of great teachers all over the world. And what you do is you invest in the places where you see God moving uniquely through your church. And for some people, it's missions. There are some churches that people will come to our church and they'll say, I need to know whether or not you give 10% to missions. And I'm like, we might, but why?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like, is that a biblical mandate?
Yeah.
But for them, they grew up in a church where the church gave 10% to missions. And what happened for that person, what they're actually saying is my heart was following what our church was doing, and that formed me. And so when they go to a church that doesn't love missions, they're like, well, something's wrong with you.
Right.
It's like dating a girl who doesn't have your values. It's not necessarily something wrong with her, but it's just not your value, So I think paying attention to your church and what they're good at and where God's bearing fruit, and are they really feeding the fruit, if you will, and following that. So any other big thoughts on pastors and churches tithing? No? You want to tithe to our church?
I'm good.
You're good. Thought I'd ask. All right, well, thank you for joining us, and I want to invite you back. We've got so much more on Ville Church Sermon Q&A.